Tony Hawk Pro Skater is the most important game ever made. So last week, I made a video about some of the most important games in history, right? Like over the years and so on. And of course, I dwelled a bit on Tony Hawk Pro Skater. And I feel it deserves its own video. Because Tony Hawk Pro Skater truly was an amazing cultural impact on the video game industry. And I really do think that this is one, if not the most important game to make gaming what it is today, right? So let's talk about it. Let's start with some history about the game. So of course the game is based on the popular, very famous skateboarder Tony Hawk. I was easily the most famous skateboarder. He's been in The Simpsons, right? You know, he was the best skateboarder in the world, basically, right? Famous for the 900. And in the game, you also play as other famous skateboarder, as Rodney Mullen, etc. Right? And they have different stats and so on. So first of all, undeniably, Tony Hawk Pro Skater was a very, very successful game. It sold incredibly well. Okay, it sold huge numbers, and of course it has many, many sequels. And now recently had this remake, right, of the second game, which I of course bought and really enjoyed, right? We kind of went back and polished the first two games. I used to even compete in the third and fourth game, and when I was a kid, I actually had the Master Chief Trophy. I was the best player in the country in Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3 and 4 actually. So I won. I seriously went and I played Tony Hawk 3 and 4 in tournaments, like in for GameCube. But anyway, I digress. So the game was very, very big and it sold fantastically, right? And secondly then, it did basically create this genre, this kind of sport game genre. Of course, they have other sport games, you know, like FIFA, NHL or whatever, right? Based on, I said, mostly team sports, but also tennis or whatever, right? But of course, Tony Hawk Pro Skater basically created this specific sport genre of, I don't know, tricks, a little more freedom, and we had some other games around that time, like for example, 180, and there were some arcade games, I suppose, that was kind of in this similar genre, but I would say that Tony Hawk really did create this specific sport genre, right? And that itself, of course, is important because there have been so many other games in a similar game, especially from the same developers. Or basically carbon copying, right? We had the BMX, we had the Kelly Slater's wakeboarding and so on. So obviously there was a bunch of other games, right, based around the same kind of sport or same kind of mechanics. But undeniably, it sold fantastically well, and then again created basically the genre, right? Now, why was it so culturally important? A huge thing that Tony Hawk first of all accomplished was to make gaming cool, right? That is the biggest thing. So in my own life story, of course, playing video games my whole life, I really, really do remember how suddenly everyone actually wanted to buy a PlayStation, right? It was like this huge thing where before Tony Hawk Pro Skater, owning a PlayStation or a Super Nintendo or whatever at a Mega Drive was seen as, you know, you're a nerd or whatever. But Tony Hawk Pro Skater was such a popular game, and Tony Hawk himself was popular, that people that were basically the cool kids, right, whatever, they started buying PlayStations to play Tony Hawk. And it was a massive cultural shift because suddenly people would ask me at school, right, how do I do this trick, right? How do I get this tape and so on? How do I beat this stage, right? So it really became like a movement, and I think that, at least when I grew up in Sweden, skateboarding and inlining, with mostly skateboarding, also had kind of a renaissance. It's a very, very popular activity, right? As a sport or whatever, I mean, in real life, and it kind of hit that perfect, especially when I grew up, it really hit that perfect, like I say, it's like the perfect storm, right? Skateboarding was immensely popular at that moment, from not being that popular for the last 20 years, then it got really popular, and then it's also, this game dropped, and it was just like a massive hit, right? And of course, skateboarding generally, of course, it got popularity as well over the years, right? But it was like this perfect storm there, and it really changed the landscape, because suddenly, like I said, right, people had to buy the PlayStation. PlayStation itself, which also just a video one day, subscribe to Slap Us One if you want that video, guys, because PlayStation itself, right, is by far the most important gaming console. Again, I thought about it briefly more in the video, but not too much here. But basically, PlayStation had this game, right, Tony Hawk Pro Skater, but it also had games like FF7, right, Fantasy similar games like that, and Final Fantasy was like the greatest graphical game ever made, that also made people want to buy the PlayStation. So PlayStation was truly a massive, massive culture. PlayStation really was this huge thing. Like, it was truly massive. So again, that's not a video going to talk about all those games, but it just felt like PlayStation basically made video game in general seem way more older, right? Like way more aimed at older people or whatever. It was a massive change like that in speaking. But again, my point then as video core is that Tony Hawk Pro Skater was the number one important part of that, right? While the other games, like I mentioned, Fantasy and so on, also were important, this game in particular was the game that made, people that, okay, but actually video gaming is pretty cool, right? So that was a massive, massive change. And I keep saying it, but it's hard to explain. Honestly, I find it hard to explain that. I mean, I give you that life story of like, okay, it used to be like this, but they started buying those games, started buying the next console and so on. So it's hard to really grasp, I feel, how big it was, especially if you didn't grow up then, especially if you weren't there in those days. But anyway, the next thing then that this game did, though, which we cannot just ignore, right, is that the game genre itself and these game mechanics actually also were quite a big deal. Because before this game, sport games most of them were realistic sports games, such as NHL and FIFA and so on. Of course, graphically wise or whatever, and they were quite limited for this time, of course. But they were trying to create a real sport game, right? The rules and everything, right? And like I said earlier, for Pro Skater went that arcade route more, right? Because obviously in the first game here, you can do a bunch of cool tricks which you can't do in reality. And I really do mean that this game also kind of massively made it popular, right? To make sport games. They weren't really following reality. They weren't following the physical limitations of sport games, right? And honestly, I don't think that was a thing at all before this game. Sure, there were some, sport games a little bit here and there, but basically, there were no big sport games before this game. I mean, ignoring the big, again, the big normal games. But there were no, like, unrealistic sport game, I would say, that was popular until this game exists. I, at least, as a game developer, has always been just a big thing, right? Because I have always been a gameplay over anything else, so I always keep saying. And I really feel this game, again, then, really pioneered the concept of we're making a fun game, right? And I've not really cared that much. For example, yesterday, I was discussing Gran Turismo with a colleague yesterday, and he was like, this game isn't realistic, right? But that's probably better because people don't actually want to play a realistic game. People don't want to actually play a realistic sport game or a realistic car game, whatever. You want it to be a little more arcadey, right? But this game really took that to a much higher degree, I would say, right? And that is a big thing still. And while we're on the topic, the game also had a bunch of new mechanics, the actual how it works, right? And it probably sounds very simple today. Oh, you like go into tricks to get some points or whatever. But it really was different. And the way you combine tricks and the way you could obviously in the game you can do a trick in the half pipe or whatever, right? And you land, you do your mulligan, you can extend your combo, right? Basically, you can extend and get more points and so on. The way the game actually works in that is actually was very new. I mean, one reason why the game was so successful wasn't just because it was the coolest game ever when it was released. It also was it actually had, and still have today, called a really, really good basic game mechanics, right? And after this game, it felt like almost every other sport game, right, in a similar vein, copied this game, right? So it massively established that thing, and we saw other games like Jet Set Radio, whatever, with a very, very similar mechanical standpoint, right? Even though Jet Set Radio, for example, doesn't have the same goal, right? You're doing something else in the game with inlines, but the basic controller of the game, how you could mechanical-wise, how everything kind of comes together, right, is almost exactly the same thing. But you have different kind of main goals, but all part of the controllers, the tricks, and all that stuff, how it works, how to combine them, are basically the exact same thing. Now, the last thing that's very important with this game is that it made Tony Hawk very, very famous, right? But it also basically made other people, part of the game, famous, and also then generally propelled this concept, right, of skateboarding and so on. And that is actually a huge thing as well, because what we saw then is that TV channels like MTV and so on, right, suddenly were promoting a bunch of different shows, right, with people that are part of this game, people doing skateboarding tricks or whatever. So many, many TV shows that I would argue would never been made if we didn't have this game, right? And those TV shows led into, I arguably would say, the prankster culture, right? Because a bunch of popular shows with skateboarding, and again, this game really, really massively made skateboarding a mainstream popular thing, right? So now these shows became mainstream too, and these shows, many of them were people doing tricks right and failing, people doing kind of pranks to friends and so on, right? And that led into basically the first prankster shows, I would say. And I would say this game and generally skateboarding and similar subcultures massively made MTV to what it was for about a decade or so, right? And that really has, of course, again spread out in popular culture. But it also leads to then, of course, my last point here is it leads to kind of today's YouTube, right? If we look at channels like Mr. Beast or whatever, right? Mr. Beast starts his popularity mostly in the whole, I gave someone $10,000, right? That comes from other people that used to do pranks first, right? So other people for Mr. Beast were giving people like, I gave someone $100, right? And those guys, before they were giving people $100, they were doing skateboard tricks or pranks or whatever. So that's kind of how it actually moved, right? This kind of like, I'm doing something, this thing, how people react, right? So that's kind of actually how that kind of grew. So this game is like one of these huge milestones for creating, I think, modern YouTube culture in a lot of ways, and generally, kind of popular culture, arguably indie culture, whatever you want to call it, because it's never really been produced as, mainstream TV shows. While of course it's been very mainstream, it's never been produced right by the biggest channels, right? It's been produced by people on the sideline and selling stuff into MTV and so on. And then of course that's why these channels today, or the creators of this stuff today, is basically all on YouTube and all social media, right? Because they don't really get that much traction on traditional TV or whatever. But I really think this game here again is like a huge part of that. Because like I said earlier, not only did it popularize skateboarding massively, because it also, I mentioned earlier, right, that it made people in my school and so on that they want to play games, right? But it also made other kids want to be skateboarders, right? It made people go all the way too, right? It was a big thing that it made skateboarders, gamers, and they made gamers skateboarders, right? So it truly was a massive hit, and the whole thing, and like me and my friends, we were skateboarding before though, a little bit, and they got super popular, and then everyone doing skateboarding and BMX and inlining. Like at least in my generation, it became for a few years, the whole auto stuff was massively popular. And again, this game is the reason why, right? And again, it combined those also then on both sides of this different subcultures, right? And if you haven't done that, me and my friends, we wouldn't be interested, right, in watching these TV shows, watching these, whatever, and so on. That's the reason we got into MTV or whatever, so to speak, in general, right, or similar channels. And then, of course, led into YouTube and so on, right? So, yeah, this game is massively important. And it's probably, again, hard, I think, to understand what a massive cultural change it was. If you weren't there, yeah, if you didn't go through it. So I hope you guys liked the video. I felt this video needed to be made, right? I felt I needed to be like, no, we need to talk a little more about the Hawk. I used to briefly mention it in my other video, and I felt, no, we need to go over it more in detail, because it really is a massive milestone in gaming culture, and it's generally speaking culture, right? Because like I said, I think this popularity of this game is spreading into still, right, modern culture today as well. For example, YouTubers and so on, creators on YouTube, etc., and other social media is still massively affected by what this game kind of started. But like I said, I just point out, of course, also mostly of the people in this game, right, or people close to those people, right, that they could get popular and make their own TV shows or whatever, so on. I mean, it's a part of that, right, of course, so as well. So it's pure this game, but it's a huge cog in that machine, right, to make this genre popular and so on. And I hope the video, subscribe, like button, have a great day.